Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Nutritional Revolution podcast. We have a superstar athlete for you guys today. We have a Montana mountain biking badass. We can swear on this podcast. She is a 5-time mountain bike marathon national champ, a 4-time world championship national team member. She has taken first in Leadville 100 twice, and she also has placed second at the Israel Epic Stage race. We have for you guys Rose Grant. Thank you, Rose, for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Amazing, amazing. So we're going to dive into all things nutrition with Rose, but as you guys know who have been listening recently, is we are going to first do 2 truths and a lie with Rose. So I'm going to let you take that off, Rose, and before we start learning too much about you. So go ahead and share some truths and lies with us.
Okay, this is funny because the lie was so hard for me to try to come up with something. So here we go. I am an only child. I got pregnant and became a pro racer simultaneously.
Okay.
I have ran the Boston Marathon before.
Ooh, okay. So I'm going to guess, and because I've listened to some podcasts you've been on, I feel like I know for sure. I know one of those for sure is true. I'm going to say maybe you are, and maybe you're not an only child is going to be my guess, but don't tell me.
I won't.
I feel like you're very fit. You definitely could have run the Boston Marathon for sure. So I think that could be a truth. So we'll leave the reveal towards the end, but let's kind of dive into a little bit of your history, Rose, and what brought you into cycling to begin with.
Yeah, this definitely kind of ties into
the the answers.
No,
yeah,
I'm a runner.
Yeah, perfect. There we go.
And no, but for real, I was a runner, but just recreationally. I didn't have a coach, but I love to push my body. I love just the endurance sports, or the fitness and running and so, but I would get injured because I don't think I was increasing my volume properly. So I got back on my bike. This was kind of like, I rode a little bit in high school. I went to college and I ran and did swimming and whatever I wanted. And primarily ran after college for fitness. And I pursued a few marathons and things like that.
Nice. There you go.
But those injuries, they kept haunting me. And my husband and I hadn't moved back to Montana too long before I started riding the mountain bike. More or less as a means of recovery from running injuries. And actually discovered that I was really talented on the mountain bike, that it came really naturally. And I did some local races, and locally I was pretty fast. I was beating, the girls that were the fast locals.
Awesome.
And just impressed some people locally that invited me. I had a local shop team invite me to ride for their local Montana team. And that was a huge honor for me. I was the only woman on the team. And I was kind of like, wow, I feel like this is such a compliment to be invited to race for this team. And I have 0 previous experience, and here I am. So if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this all the way. And so I spent the next year racing as an amateur, and I raced primarily regionally. And I went to a couple national events as an amateur. I went to cross country mountain bike nationals and mountain bike marathon nationals.
Okay.
And I won my age group in mountain bike nationals, and I won my age group and the overall in the marathon nationals.
Amazing.
So I went through that year as an amateur pretty much undefeated, and just felt like the next step was to upgrade to pro. And it's not super difficult to upgrade to pro as a mountain bike athlete. So as long as you can show a few results that make you legitimate enough, then you know, so it wasn't that hard. So I did that moving into 2012. That was my first year.
Awesome. Yeah. And for our listeners, I know we have a lot of runners, we have a lot of triathlete listeners too. So can you explain a little bit about what the difference is between cross country distance and marathon distance?
Yeah. So same as running, they're just different disciplines within the sport. Mountain bike would be considered about an hour and a half race. And that is the only mountain bike discipline in the Olympics. So it's quite competitive. You have the World Cup mountain bike races, where you have those cross country races that are an hour and a half, which is really high intensity, very technical style of racing. And then you have World Cup downhill. So I'm not involved with World Cup downhill.
Yeah.
And then marathon mountain bike is going to be a longer distance. You usually around 60 miles on the mountain bike, or oftentimes it's broken down more so into time. So that would be, you know, anywhere from 3.5 to 5 hour races would be considered a marathon. And then ultra distance would be closer to that 100-mile and over distance. Wow. And then you have stage racing, you know, and it could be 3 days or 6 days. So yeah.
Amazing. So through kind of this timeline of your history of cycling, I know you've gone to some more gravel racing a little bit too, right? Could you tell us a little bit about that transition into gravel? When did that happen? And have you always had a gravel bike? I would imagine going from mountain to gravel, like what kind of things did you notice as kind of big changes there? Or did you ever ride a road bike before? Too, is the question.
Well, I train on the road, honestly.
Okay,
quite a bit, just because it offers a little more consistency. And when you're doing structured workouts, it's a little easier to accomplish on the road. Totally. So I do have a road bike, but I've always really, I haven't ever liked racing on the road, and I haven't really done it, but we do some group rides sometimes.
Yeah.
And I've never enjoyed that high speed with a group of people. Just feels very scary for me.
Yeah.
And then also you have these surges, and so the pace isn't consistent, and I'm just like a steady burn, like type of athlete.
Yeah.
And so a lot of those tactics do get carried over into gravel, but what happens is gravel kind of really gains popularity, and because it suits a wide variety of athletes. You have athletes that are moving, you know, maybe retiring from road racing, but they want to continue to race. So we have a lot of road athletes that do gravel racing, and then it's an off-road race still mostly. So it's, you know, you get a field where the athletes have backgrounds in a bunch of different random disciplines. And so it does create a really interesting dynamic. And I honestly don't enjoy it as much as I enjoy racing my mountain bike, but because that is where the focus has kind of gravitated towards as an off-road athlete. So really, I can't even really say I'm a mountain biker anymore, even though I am. And that's where, you know, I enjoy racing my mountain bike more, and I want to be considered a mountain biker, but we kind of have been pushed into being able to do both. And it's really, now I'm more I'm an off-road racer.
Yeah.
Meaning off pavement.
Yes.
Which is just inclusive of gravel and mountain biking. So
awesome. Do you find it different when you fueling or storing your fuel and hydration on a mountain bike versus a gravel bike?
I think the principles are really similar. The distance in gravel racing, I think, is probably the biggest difference, unless typically on the mountain bike, races are not as long as they are on the gravel bike. That's not always true. Races like Leadville took me 7.5 hours pretty consistently. I've also done like 100-mile mountain bike race in Butte that took me 9.5 hours. So that's not always true, but the gravel races are consistently always really long. So that would be really the biggest thing. But otherwise, my strategies are pretty consistent. It doesn't matter if I'm mountain biking long or doing a long gravel race. It's more the duration of the event that really is where the changes would be, if there were changes.
Yeah. Awesome. I'd love to dive into with you maybe kind of like the two extremes, meaning like the shorter duration distance, maybe that's like the cross country style versus either a stage race, which is like the multi-day, and like I think we can start all the way from like the beginning. Like, what does prep look like going into two different events like that, a shorter distance versus maybe a multi-day race for you? How does that differ?
Yeah, absolutely. For a shorter race, say it's an hour and a half, it's going to be really high intensity. Going into the event, you want to have just the right balance of stress on your body and recovery.
Yeah.
So your body's not going into recovery mode or sleep mode where it feels lethargic and things like that. And that could be confused, with a taper. It's like, well, you still actually have to like get your heart rate up a little bit. So it's a fine balance going into that week of the race, where you want to be really recovered. You want your fatigue levels to be, really at a good level. But for the shorter races, it's not a huge difference. I would just say that you don't need to eat as much. Just enough to feel not hungry. But I feel like for me, the food groups all remain really similar, and I'm really simple, but I really like, as my favorite starchy vegetable, potatoes. I love to get either sweet potatoes or regular potatoes. I like that over rice or pasta. Or not like over it, but more than rice or pasta. Just because I feel like it offers a little more nourishment, and or other root vegetables too, beets, carrots, and then just whatever protein source, usually either chicken or salmon, or a good steak. And then a vegetable. There's nothing, and good fats. Like, I think just a really balanced diet is great. And then I've always just been a real advocate of eating what feels right for you. And I think that's easier for people that are in tune to their bodies rather than people that really like to, do things by the book. And there's definitely those two, that is a very, there are those two different categories, and people that are very data driven, numbers driven, they're weighing their food. And I've never been like that. I'm not like that with my training. I'm not like that with my diet. I'm not like that with my time. But like, I have a lot of structure in my life, but like, I don't have the time or energy to do it on that level. And I don't want to, because I still want to enjoy my food and my life.
Totally. Yeah.
But so shorter events, you don't need to eat as much. But when you go into these longer events or stage racing, I think it's the quantity that changes more than anything. Is just, you really have to be mindful to make sure you're eating really nutrient dense, large quantity meals. And I have felt a little not so great in the past, like going into the event, just feeling like, wow, I feel like I've been overeating for 3 days. It doesn't feel so good. But I feel like as long as your food sources are clean, and your gut health is good, and you're still, having a good bowel movement every day, it's fine. And even like this last race, it was just under 6 hours. And I remember kind of feeling that way going into the event, like, man, I feel like I've really eaten a lot of food the last few days. I reached the point during that race where so I dropped the bar that I had in my pocket. I thought about stopping for it, but I was like, I'd already had a few things go wrong and I was trying to figure out a rhythm. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to need that. And I was fine without it, actually.
Awesome. Wow.
But I remember reaching a point where I was hungry in the race. And I was like, wow, I haven't felt hungry for like 4 days. And now I'm really hungry. I'm glad I ate as much as I did going into this event. So that's really good. And, I think, I hear of people that are like, oh, I'm going to try keto, like going into, or, I think paleo would be fine, but it's like, man, I just want to eat clean and just allow myself to consume the amount that I need to, and food groups that I know are like have high nourishment.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it for me. I guess I'm mindful of how much gluten I consume, although I'm not allergic to it. I'm just mindful. And then also that I love cheese, but outside of cheese or yogurt, I don't drink a ton of milk, I guess. So just, I think those higher inflammatory food groups like gluten and dairy, I'm just more mindful that I'm not over consuming those things.
Yeah.
As a general rule.
I think that's important because I think many people too, it is hard for some people to listen to their bodies and, or relying on certain numbers and statistics. Like I was just checking in with a client before we hopped on and she did a practice carb load and she was like, I was so full when I started my run that I didn't want to start fueling during, but I mean, that's partly why we practice. So, what that feels like too. So, but I think that's important. Like you're saying, you do intentionally push yourself to consume a little bit more for these bigger situations. And you might not, we're going against sometimes our intentional hunger cue sensations for some of these types of events to keep the glycogen stores stocked up. But, and then relying too on like real food sources, I think is really important. And I think sometimes too can be really hard for people to do when they're trying to intentionally carb load. I have run into the mistakes of athletes where I'll tell them we need to carb load and they'll want to eat like pizza and chips and ice cream. And it's like, those are also very high fat and that's going to make you feel really full and the digestion slow down big time. So
sugar, like you just, and I just think, that
sugar roller coaster.
You just might not feel so good. That kind of carb loading.
Right. Yeah. So with something like that, so with a stage race, there's, like you're saying, a little bit more nutrition going into it ahead of time. And then it sounds like carbohydrates as well, for sure. Micronutrient dense foods. And then what does your like race breakfast look like for cross country versus first day of stage racing?
Pretty much the same. Okay. I don't try to eat extra, but I normally do like overnight oats, honestly, as my race breakfast, just because a lot of our race starts are quite early and I can prep it the night before. It's just super easy. And for a shorter distance race, which I really don't do anymore, but you definitely want to eat your breakfast 3 hours before the race start. And that gives you full opportunity to really digest that food. So you don't have food sitting in your stomach when you're trying to race, because it takes energy to digest your food and actually could potentially take away from a race effort. Plus you just don't want to have that like deal with, that as you're trying to go really hard.
Totally.
So that's kind of general time rule. And then I'm not as strict on longer events that I eat that like a full 3 hours, partially because a lot of them start between 6 and 7 in the morning. And then you just have to get up so early. But a breakfast like overnight oats, if it's not overly loaded with, it's like a pretty light breakfast. I put some nut butter on it. I usually mix in a little yogurt and some granola and some fruit.
Awesome.
it's easy to consume. It tastes good.
Yeah.
And it digests well. It settles in my stomach well. And for the longer races, some of the races can still start really hard, but generally like not as hard, and they don't stay as hard as a cross country race would. So the effort is easier to eat it a little bit closer to the race start. But I would still be like at 2 hours, instead of 3. So I'm not saying eat like half hour before you start.
Yeah. Do you do any like quick digesting sources shortly before you start, or is that the last thing you eat before you hop on the bike?
Yeah, no, I do. Usually I would just have like an energy gel on the start line because that would kind of just kickstart me into my nutrition and my feeling for the race.
Yeah.
So I'll take a gel, anytime after we line up and we're in the start gate. I'll take a gel at that time. And then I usually will have hydration mix in my water bottle and kind of have an estimate of how much hydration I'm going to need. Like, is it really important that I finish this bottle, or do I just am mindful that I'm drinking? Normally I'm thirsty and I just listen to my body and I give myself what I need. It's pretty rare, really only if it happens to be really cold outside and I don't feel like drinking and the race would be long. But normally I can just listen to my body, and if it's thirsty, I drink. And then I love having hydration mix in my bottles also, because you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You're getting your calories, which are also, you have electrolytes and amino acids and different things. I usually use the GU Roctane energy mix. Another good one is Never Second. A really good, their C30 is really good. And I am an athlete for the Feed High Performance team. Awesome. And so I get all my, my nutrition from the Feed, which is like an online retail store for like all things, like sports nutrition related. Even hydration mixes or hydration packs and things like that. And then like for I do wear a hydration pack often also, especially in this last gravel race that I did, where I want to keep my hands on the handlebars. I don't want to be messing with water bottles. I don't want to risk running out of water or dropping a bottle. It's like a really safe option when you're performing to have a hydration pack. And I don't always, but it's probably half and half, where sometimes I'll have a hydration pack for half the race or the whole race, just because it makes your hydration so accessible. And there's a lot of courses that are hard to drink on too, where you don't want to be fumbling around, and or the distance between feed stations is too far that you don't want to rely on just 2 bottles. So there are a lot of instances, and then, or there's races where it's completely self-supported and you're not allowed. That's how a lot of gravel races actually are, is you're not allowed to receive hand ups or mechanical support. You're completely dependent on the race, the feed zones that the race supports the athletes with, which would require you to stop. And that's, as a pro racer, oftentimes that's not really an option. Right. So you try to start and carry all of your food and your hydration, when you start, so you don't have to stop. So it's interesting. And then also, like, that just brings up another thing that these long races kind of force us to think about. And not everyone's like this, but normally for long races, I have to pee at some point. And again, like in gravel races specifically, and I've kind of got to that point in mountain biking too, like, how do I navigate this situation? And like the last weekend, I was like, I don't want to pee on the bike. And that's like, if it gets bad enough, that's what it comes down to, is you just like find a place where you can, and it's an art, like it is not easy. I mean, you definitely have to like ease up for a little while. And just like, as a woman too, there's no way to get around just wetting your jammy, and it's just not pleasant. and if it's cold or rainy, like, well, definitely it's not an option.
Yeah.
But I think what I've done also with the preload part is consuming additional electrolytes, like liquid IV or salt stick, or like a lot of the brands make their own electrolyte tabs, like makes like a hydration electrolyte tab that you put in water, but to kind of be preloading not only on carbs, but also on your electrolytes. And if you are like loading that salt a little more and drinking extra, hydrating extra, hopefully the intention would be that your body would contain a bit more fluid than just urinating it all out. Because actually that's a good way to lose electrolytes too, is just urinating oftentimes. So my strategy has kind of been to really work on hydrating and preloading the electrolytes like a couple days before. And then the evening before the race, I just kind of start to sip. So instead of like chugging water, I'll just kind of start to sip. And I'll sip through the evening and into the morning. And then I hope that I don't have to pee in the race. But anyway, you know, you deal with whatever you need to, but, and that's as an elite athlete, you know, I think if I have also like been like, I am not doing this today, I'm going to stop. So
I think that's great. I think you brought up a good point too with the fluid. I mean, you almost detailed out race prep we do for our clients with the carbohydrates and the fluids and the electrolytes and stuff like that. And with that, I mean, one of the things we always run into or hear from clients is when we do extra fluids and we do extra sodium, like you're saying, the intention is to do what we're doing with carbohydrates. We're trying to stock glycogen. So we're trying to stock sodium. We're trying to stock a little bit of extra fluids to delay dehydration for the race. But clients who normally hop on the scale, like panic because they obviously see the number go up because we're retaining fluids. Is that something that you ever dealt with in the beginning of starting fluid loading intentionally? Or?
Well, I don't weigh myself hardly ever, but
awesome.
I did preload electrolytes so intentionally for this last event that I was wondering if I would kind of start feeling puffy.
Oh yeah.
Like, am I gonna just kind of like blow up like a balloon? And I didn't. And I don't, you know, that's just a mind game that you know, it's just not worth it to worry about that. Because, you know, if you do it properly, the benefits so outweigh any negative pre-race questions. You know, and, you know, there are like the kilo to weight concerns and all of that, but those are just numbers that I have, again, like, you know, I think it's just, you use those tools as a tool to help you, but they could also really detrimentally, like negatively affect your mindset and different things too. So, you know, you kind of take it with a grain of salt a little bit. But, you know, you want to perform well in your race. So basically, like, some extra salt and water retention is a good thing. And also, like, you know, having a good bowel movement before the race, like that's not normally an issue just based on race nerves. And like, I don't know, my body at least is pretty, it responds well to race nerves. It knows what's coming, and it usually doesn't have a problem, but you know, that probably weighs more than
there you go. Exactly.
Any extra water retention, you know? So no, that I think if you can go into a race really well hydrated and you're carrying extra water in your body, like that is exactly what you want.
I think that's excellent advice and definitely helpful probably for many of our listeners. We encourage not weighing yourself obviously during that time when you're doing that stuff, if it does affect the mental game, because it definitely does. Like you're saying, for a lot of people, they want this like lighter is faster, lighter is faster, lighter is faster. And they think, you know, they want to go into it as light as they can, but we need to we need to load up some things so you can actually finish the race. So
yeah, I mean, there is race weight, and that's kind of what I call it. And like, I might only be at race weight for a month or two in the summer, like kind of during the peak of the season. And usually, like, if I'm like doing Leadville, especially when I'm also at altitude preparing for that race, like, it's just hard to maintain weight.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty mindful that race weight is not a maintainable weight, and it's not a weight that it's healthy for me to be at year around.
Right.
And like, I typically do fluctuate a little bit with the season. But yeah, like, when I am at race weight, I also have to be quite a bit more mindful about eating enough, because I do get hungry. Like, I feel like I'm hungry all the time. And so, just like, if you are at race weight and you're prioritizing an A race, and you want to be nice and light for that race, like, that is fine, but don't try to maintain that for an entire season or 6 months or anything, because it will result in illness or, strength. Like, you're going to lack strength or power or endurance. So it's okay for a short amount of time, but not to sustain that for very long.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think when someone's in that situation, they potentially are setting themselves up for, we call it like LEA, or low energy availability too. And like you're saying, the immune system can tank, they can increase the risk of injury and all of that stuff. So I think there's a short window for that to work out. But so kind of being mindful of your time here, we've kind of talked a little bit about prepping and race morning breakfast. Is there a certain amount of like bottles per hour or carbs per hour or gels or anything like that you try and aim for something longer, like Leadville, for example?
Yeah. Yes, for sure. I worked with my coach pretty diligently the first time I did Leadville. And that's where I was like pretty structured with how I executed that race, knowing that I needed to finish this water bottle by the time I got to, the first aid station. And also knowing it was going to be chilly in the morning. I was for sure going to have to pee. I was like, I'm going to for sure have to pee. So I pre-planned that in my head so that when I had to pee, I wasn't panicking, and I didn't, like, what do I do? I have to pee. I have like 5 hours of racing left. So I think just to kind of have a plan for things like that just helps during races, especially. To know what to do. And I think I don't have like a set amount of hydration, at least a bottle an hour, but it really depends on the temperature, but I drink a lot. I feel like I drink a lot. And this last race, I had 100-ounce hydration bladder that I had full with like 400 calories of hydration mix. And I went through 2 24-ounce water bottles and 2 26-ounce water bottles.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's a lot. And I can't remember exactly what it is for Leadville either, but I kind of look at the course profile and kind of estimate the speed that I'm going to be going. And I usually will figure out a way to make sure I have enough liquids, because I tend to be thirsty. And then you have athletes that are like, oh, I couldn't drink anything or I couldn't eat anything. And I'm like, I'm the opposite. I'm like, I need food, I need water. Like, my body just knows what I need. And so I work really hard to make sure that I have what I need when my body's telling me, like, this is what you need. And it's the same way really with food too. I said I ate gel on the start line, which is true. And then I think a rough goal is to eat a gel about every 30 minutes. And that is what I typically primarily consume for racing, just because they're quick and easy to get down, and it's, pretty compact, simple carbohydrates. and a little bit of solid food. And my solid food is either Joj bars, which I really like. My best friend founded that company, and they are
we had Jess
bars
on here.
Oh,
yes.
Awesome.
I didn't know that. That's so funny. What a small world. Yeah. When I tried her bars, the first one I had to try was the pancakes and bacon. Cause I was like, I've never tried pancakes and bacon bar, but yeah, her stuff is amazing and she's wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I think before I really started using Joj bars as my solid food in races, I would make my own like sushi rice bars.
Oh yeah.
Where you just make sushi rice. And just I'd add a little soy sauce, a little olive oil, a little nutritional yeast, and then you just kind of press them into bars and wrap them in like parchment foil. And that's great too. They're savory, they're simple carbohydrates, they're relatively easy to consume. Like you kind of have to be mindful of your packaging, but then I started just using Joj bars and I realized that they actually have great flavor. Like they're soft and chewy and they like, I'll just take a bite and let it sit in my cheek for a little bit. And then it's just like, they're really easy, but I'll make sure I open the package prior to starting the race. So the packages are open in my pocket. So when I pull it out, it's just, it's already open. I don't have to mess around trying to open it. And then also I'll just kind of incorporate that solid food along with my gel. So I'll still try to aim for a gel every 30 minutes, but it's never exact. And I usually fall behind a little bit, which is actually fine because I have calories in my water. Yeah. And then, relatively early on, like, if I'm doing a 6-hour race, in the first 30 miles or the first 2 hours, I'll start incorporating bites of solid food too. So that like, it's gonna be a 6-hour race. I want to eat 2 Joj bars by the time I'm done. I ended up dropping one of mine last weekend. Yeah. But I did finish the one and it was such a high paced race and there was so much going on. I don't think I would have had time or prioritized needing to eat a second anyways. Right. Yeah. So as long as you're continuing to ingest the gels and the I think you're almost kind of a backup plan with the calories and your hydration too.
Yeah, that's great. Do you like with something like a Joj versus a gel, like Joj bars will have a little bit of fats, a little bit of protein. Like, do you try and time those at certain potentially sections of the race? Like maybe not taking it, right before a climb, or do you prefer the gel then, or is that something that you think about? Or?
Yeah, I mean, more or less, it's like, okay, I should eat something. We're on a paved section. This would be a good opportunity to have a bite of solid food. Yeah. So it's in the moment, really. You have to eat when you're not going as fast. Right. And so normally that would be on a climb. Like the climbs can, as long as they're not technical, that's a great opportunity to think about eating and drinking. Yeah. And then how long has it been since how are you doing on your solid food? Right. And how far are you into the race and how long do you have left? So yeah, I think I would use the solid food as like, okay, I'm going to eat 1 Joj bar by the time I'm about halfway, or around 3 hours or around 50 miles. And then try to eat the second one, the second half of the race. And it's just going to be my goal to finish both of those Awesome. I'm a little bit on the looser side of, I guess all that data. I train the same way, like I still think there's a beautiful art in, training by perceived effort. And I use power meters and heart rate and all that too. But, I think just being able to utilize everything and then just kind of keep us grounded in, how do we feel? I think that's important.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think there's something to be said for, there's all the data and all that stuff out there right now, but someone who like yourself, who's achieved such a high level, not relying on like fine, numerical data and getting, nitty gritty with it. I think there's something to be said for that. And I will also say that, we've had Ted King on and we have had Peter Stetina on, and both of them are very similar. They're kind of like, prefer real food, eat kind of as you feel. There's not a like, at this time I'm going to eat this and this time, like, you know, and I mean, you guys are all incredibly high performing athletes. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. If, you know, at performing that high level, you can listen to your body really well and rely on those cues and be really successful. So yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's people that, you know, they may struggle so much more eating and, you know, and so they have to set up different perimeters to make sure that they aren't getting behind. And so I think it is individual.
Yeah, definitely. So one last thing we'll dive into before we do reveal your lie. What is quickly like your post recovery look like? What's the first thing you do or eat or drink post finishing a race?
Yeah, training most of the time and racing, because training is also just, you know, important to be able to do it again the next day. I usually go for recovery mix first. And oftentimes I incorporate that into a smoothie. Oh, nice, so when I get home, I'll either go with GU Rocking Recovery, which also has protein in it too. Perfect. And they have chocolate and vanilla. And if I do that, I just blend the drink mix with almond milk, frozen banana, and peanut butter or almond butter.
Yum.
And then that's a great one. Or Kyoku makes like a superfood
I've heard
smoothie.
Of that. Yes. Yeah.
And you don't get as many carbs because it has some stevia in it, but so I think it depends on the workout, but I still kind of add the same ingredients and it's delicious. Or if I'm in a real rush, I'll just add almond milk and the drink mix by itself and just shake it in a shaky thing and go quickly to school pickup or whatever I have to do.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, I think that's really important is getting in those calories like as soon as you're done, just to aid in the recovery. And then you know, in racing specifically, I'm okay for about an hour and then I tank really quickly if I don't get a good amount of solid like meal, a good meal. My blood sugar just tanks. So and then I like can barely function. So I have found it's really important for me to pre-plan having a post-race meal like within probably the hour of finishing. And there have been times that eating that quickly after a race has been challenging, but most of the time I'm ready to eat.
Challenging because sometimes you don't have an appetite, you're saying?
Or just the effort has made me feel a bit nauseous. So last year in Leadville, I was especially like that. And it could have just been the high intensity effort, like at the end of that race and being at altitude, like I was, I think they all maybe contributed to that being a bit worse than it normally is for me. Yeah,
definitely. I could see that going down. And what altitude are you at in Montana, out of curiosity?
Only about 3,500 feet.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's a little bit higher at Leadville, right? Twice that at least. That's impressive. I think that's a whole other topic we'd love to have to dive into with you one day, is like prepping for races at, you know, some serious elevation. That would be a whole other fun one to dive into. But
that is a fun one.
So let's see. Let's have you reveal what your lie was.
Okay. I'm not an only child.
Oh yes, I got it right. Okay. How many siblings do you have?
I have 4 brothers.
Oh my gosh.
I'm second oldest.
Wow, that's awesome.
Cool.
All right. Well, I'm happy I got the pop
you
quiz
were right.
And where can people find you?
I'm most active on my Instagram account. It's at Rose K Grant.
Okay.
On Instagram. And that's probably the best channel for now. I have Facebook and I have a website that I don't touch. But maybe that will change in the next chapter of life.
Awesome. There you go. Talking about next chapter. I mean, what's coming up for you? I know you mentioned a race is coming up. You told me before we hit record, but I think there's some other kind of bigger changes too coming up. If you want to share a little bit.
I do have just one race left of the season coming up November 5th in Michigan called Iceman. Super fun. It's a 2 hour, pretty fast point race, mountain bike race. Yay.
Awesome.
But I am retiring from professional racing after this season. I just have felt that this chapter of my life is complete and I'm not really chasing unfinished goals at this point. I just, it's like the race wins are fun, but it's like, I feel like I have discovered who I was meant to be through cycling. And I want to take what I've learned and apply that in a different way.
Amazing.
And my goal is to just move more into coaching and mentorship.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll be your first mentee.
Yeah.
I could use some help, I'm sure. Awesome. Well, thank you, Rose, so much for joining us. You've been a wealth of information. I love all the information you shared with the kind of listening to your body and prep and all of that. So I'm sure the listeners will absolutely enjoy that. So thank you again so much for your time.
You are so welcome.